Stunlock Studios, who are perhaps best known for their free-to-play brawler game, Battlerite, have emerged with a brand new title known as V Rising. In V Rising, players take on the role of a newly resurrected vampire. Upon re-entering the land of the living, players will have to fight their way through enemies and build up their vampiric empire anew. We got the opportunity to spend some time playing the V Rising closed beta, and going into this game not knowing what to expect, we were pleasantly surprised by it. Instead of a cookie-cutter formulaic top-down hack-and-slash game, it ends up as a rather deep crafting and survival game, with multiplayer elements that could keep it going for years. I think V Rising has an interesting premise. Rather than the typical underdog hero saves the world from the overwhelming darkness shtick, you play as a recently revived vampire in a world your ilk once ruled. A human uprising has all but defeated your kind, and now it's time to re-establish your presence and rise to power, either working with or against other vampire players. It's an intriguing setup, told through a flashy opening cutscene, but unfortunately that represents about as much plot as you're going to find in this beta build. Now, I appreciate I might be in the minority when it comes to wanting narrative context, irrespective of the genre, but be warned, the Diablo-esque gothic setting and ARPG combat do not come with an equally grandiose narrative. At present, you've got a slowly expanding checklist of crafting jobs, and once the required structure is built, several beasts to hunt down to consume their power-infused blood. When it comes to the gameplay, V Rising is unlikely to surprise anyone fond of the farm craft grind repeat loop. There's an extensive list of crafting recipes to unlock for both character gear and your settlement, and that means you need resources. Mercifully, V Rising does away with the common approach of resource-specific tools. Think skinning tools, axes and picks, and you simply accrue lumber, stone and fiber by bludgeoning natural resources with your equipped weapon. As a result, I find myself merrily slashing my way through the world, slaying creatures for their parts, and felling trees and shattering rocky outcrops in between. When it comes to crafting or building basic gear, or powering basic structures, it's easy to stay stocked up. The biggest problem was finding a clear spot without another vampire settlement on it to start building. Of course, the name of the game is increasing your gear score and expanding your settlement, which means ever more complex crafting recipes and rare resources you need to harvest from either powerful creatures or refine them yourself using crafting facilities, which in turn means shuffling around inventory resources and waiting on timers. Now, as much as I enjoyed the abundance of basic resources that allowed me to quickly establish and expand a basic settlement, V Rising quickly ramps up the requirements, and you'll find yourself engaging with the fluid, but at least on lower levels, and remarkable combat. A bit of positioning while holding the left mouse button will get you through basic, respawning mobs, but you'll need better gear and careful use of your powers on cooldowns if you want to survive going up against tougher foes, and if you're on a PvP server, potentially other players. Now, if this beta is anything to go by, V Rising has a solid enough foundation in place, which should satisfy those who love the idea of a daily mission or two to grind out some new crafting recipes, increase your gear score, or maybe expand your settlement. However, it feels unguided at present, with no clear overarching goal and little incentive for interaction with other players. If V Rising could make the tasks feel a little more organic or narratively significant, allow you to draw on a global pool of resources well within your settlement, and perhaps provide some tangible bonuses for teaming up with other players, it would definitely make for a more compelling addition to a saturated genre. Players in V Rising will have to complete a set of tutorial objectives before getting fully up to speed with the game's mechanics. These involve some resource gathering at first, and then crafting some new gear for your vampire. Thankfully, after a short stint bashing skeletons in a graveyard finally yields you enough bone for a makeshift sword, you'll move on to hacking down trees and bludgeoning rocks for lumber and stone. This leads to more elaborate weapons and armor, but eventually you'll be able to start creating your own vampiric base in a vast open world. Building up said homestead is essential to surviving in V Rising. You'll lay down the heart of your castle, which you power with blood essence obtained from living creatures, but once that's done, you're able to increase your castle's boundaries and build various objects within it. An early example includes a coffin to rest in during daylight hours, or a storage chest for your gear, but soon enough you can build other objects that allow you to refine material. Gather enough lumber and put it in a sawmill, for example. You can then create planks and sawdust. Those planks and sawdust, of course, can be used to craft other items you'll need. It doesn't deviate wildly from other games in the genre, but it often felt like a mix of Satisfactory crossed with Valheim and Titan Quest. Apart from the typical resource gathering, crafting and building, V Rising also involves a lot of exploration and battles with enemies. Players will have to venture out into the wilderness, and you can encounter wild animals that can be hunted for even more resources. But there are other dangers in the world. such as thieves, bandits, mages, and of course other vampires, if you're playing one of the PvP modes. To get you through these battles, you have access to a range of vampiric powers that look quite flashy in action. Complicating things is the fact you're a vampire. You need to feast on blood, and if you run out of it, you'll eventually die. There's also the small problematic matter of sunlight to deal with. If you're out in the sun for too long, you start to smoke. Stay out even longer, and you'll eventually disintegrate as the sun burns right through you. This makes the gameplay of V Rising exceedingly tense during the day, since you'll have to stick to the shadows as much as possible. As a result, exploration during the day turns into a battle not only against enemies, but also the elements. You're best off exploring by night, and using the daytime period to build up your vampiric castle. I found V Rising combines solid gameplay mechanics from a variety of genres into one sweet package. Yes, it might be formulaic, but it's a formula that seems to work well, and has sucked me in. It's really satisfying adventuring out at night, raiding a nearby crypt, defeating the enemies, and returning back to your castle with a whole bunch of new resources for crafting. Obviously, the game is still in early access right now, but I think V Rising has a lot of potential. I'm hoping the story of the game is expanded upon, and doesn't take a backseat in the final release because the premise itself is great. If you happen to be a fan of both hack and slash games and crafting survival games, this is a title you'll want to keep an eye on.